U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson arrives in Japan later on Wednesday for a three-nation tour of Asia. His trip comes as concerns grow over North Korea and potential U.S. protectionism. Stephen Engle joining us now from Tokyo, where he'll be following Tillerson's visit. Steve, good to have you. So is the new Secretary of State's first big international trip also the big first test that he'll be facing?
Yeah, absolutely. You could look at it that way because he's made a couple of overseas trips already since becoming Secretary of State. But that was to Bonn, Germany, and also to Mexico City. This is going to be his real first test. And he's kind of camera shy and has not had a press conference. So we don't really know how this former businessman, of course, the former head of ExxonMobil, is going to take that business expertise, his deal-making chops, if you will, and bring them to Asia on a diplomatic front. Again, he is Donald Trump's top diplomat, and he needs to come here and really resolve, well, maybe not resolve, but address the key issues in North Asia. So he's coming to Japan first, really the most solid U.S. ally in this part of the world, in North Asia at least. And this follows, of course, on the heels of the Abe and Trump meeting, which by all accounts went over pretty well. So he'll be in Tokyo first, and then Friday he goes to Seoul. And boy, that opens up a whole nother Pandora's box, if you will, because of the power vacuum in Seoul right now, and of course the concerns about North Korea. North Korea is really going to dominate this trip in Japan, in Seoul, and in Beijing, which will happen on the weekend.
Now, what about Tillerson's visit to China at the end of this trip? Now, how thorny could this all get here, Steve?
There are so many issues, not to mention, of course, well, I just mentioned it. North Korea is going to be the top of that list, perhaps, to get China to play a more active role in bringing in North Korea into discussing its nuclear capabilities, including, of course, the threat of the intercontinental ballistic missiles that could potentially in the near future reach the continental United States. That's a big concern. But then, of course, we had Rex Tillerson giving the most pointed remarks in his Senate confirmation hearings about the South China Sea and China's expansion militarily in that part of the world. Will this be a key point of confrontation between China and the United States with Tillerson in Beijing this weekend, Saturday and Sunday? Again, it's not necessarily his portfolio, but trade issues. Of course, Donald Trump has talked about punitive tariffs on Chinese. He's talked about labeling China a currency manipulator. There is so much to be discussed, even though as Secretary of State, he will look at more of the geopolitical issues. But again, it's at the backdrop of smoothing ties ahead of what is likely to be a Xi-Trump meeting, perhaps as early as next month.